the collective that makes up the nation and state, have an issue with truth. The most striking example is our collective response to Indigenous deaths in custody. I'm going to do a short personal essay on this issue. I'm sure I don't need to say this, but the criticism I give is constructive. I'm observing dynamics which concern me. I know concern others because I've been approached by them and should be discussed. I should also warn Indigenous viewers who hold traditional beliefs that I'm going to discuss and use the name of deceased persons. Australian viewers will be aware of the Deaths in Custody Royal Commission, which was held in Australia from 1987 to 1991. Federal Court Judge James Henry Muirhead, Queen's Counsel, was commissioned to study and report on Indigenous deaths in custody because there were concerns that deaths of Indigenous people, especially Aboriginal people in custody, were too common. Allegations of foul play, violence, or indifference motivated by racism caused or contributed to deaths abounded. It's understandable because when using comparative benchmarks of ratios of percentage of population to percentages of deaths, there actually was a considerable disparity and an inequitable outcome that appeared to be racially based. The government, academia, and judiciary were concerned enough to start this commission, which at the time was the longest running and most expensive in Australian history, costing the taxpayers massive amounts of money. The full report is at the State Library, and the full records take up over 200 metres of shelf space. The commission examined 99 deaths between the 1st of January 1980 and the 31st of May 1989. So what did this extensive, expansive inquiry find? Nothing sinister. There were no deaths, zero, zilch, none, attributed to foul play or even brutality. The disproportionate number of Indigenous deaths in custody when compared to the ratio of Indigenous people in general population is explained by offending behaviour and consequent high incarceration rates. In fact, the rates of death in comparable situations were actually worse for non-Indigenous people in custody. Not only was there no foul play or brutality, the Commission could not make allegations of racism, systematic or otherwise. Now, for complete clarity, I'm not arguing the Royal Commission didn't find serious structural problems. It did. Substandard care contributed to the death toll, and many deaths were avoidable. This has been largely rectified. There was a criminology unit attached to the Commission, a group of academics whose job it was to sift through data, evidence, and present it. Research papers of the criminology unit of the Royal Commission were released and has this on page 3. The hostility towards the work of the criminology unit reached a climax only a few months after the work started, when it became clear the research showed Aboriginal persons in either police or prison custody were no more likely to die than non-Aboriginal people. This general finding was interpreted by some significant elements of the staff as undermining the very foundations of the Royal Commission. To even hint that such a conclusion was possible was seen as disloyal, misguided, and obviously wrong. At one stage, the very existence of the criminology unit within the Royal Commission was threatened. It was able to continue its work, albeit with smaller staff. Of course, this raises the question, did the government know that at the time? I mean, the Commission was acting independently. Well, here's Dr. Gary Johns, who was a member of the government at the time. This is a short edit of a full interview which he gave me that I'll put out in due course.
Within the first 6 weeks of the Commission, the government knew there was no distinction in the deaths in custody between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, but they carried on regardless.
This happened over 30 years ago. Clearly, the significant elements spoken about by the criminology report didn't see the Commission's role as one of finding facts to address a serious issue, but a weapon in an ideological war. The old adage that the first victim of war is truth proved true. People in serious positions of power put pressure on evidence gatherers and interpreters to ensure the correct conclusions were reached. Now, you think about the courage that those criminologists showed. God only knows what was said about them and done to them. Tragically, the pattern of willful blindness to evidence continues even in the literally life and death situations of deaths in custody. In fact, allegations that a lack of appropriate care continue. One of the ideas mooted by the Commission was that an appropriate level of care would be provided to Indigenous people by Indigenous people effectively a separate system run by Indigenous people for Indigenous people, would and should be the keystone of a successful response, and that this response would prevent unnecessary deaths. Consequently, public intoxication was decriminalised, and responsibility for the custody of intoxicated Indigenous persons was given to night shelters, often run by Indigenous groups. But that hasn't worked. It needs to be said that, considering the nature of the issue, there will always be deaths in custody. It's not just because we're finite beings, because where there are people, there will be death. We're talking about people living on the streets whose life choices lead to chronic ill health. People who live that sort of life die young from preventable causes. That's a really important thing to acknowledge. But here in Cairns, there were 2 deaths in my hometown which demonstrate 3 things. First, that we as a society find it difficult to identify, articulate, accept, and apply the truth to public policy. When the truth does raise its ugly head, as it was in the Commission, it's ignored. Second, setting up parallel systems for Indigenous people doesn't work. Finally, the continued inability to see and accept the truth and continuing to insist on and apply false narratives is hurting the most vulnerable in our society. There is currently a matter that is still before the coroner, the death of Miss Patricia Pascoe of Lockhart River. I won't show her image because I know her family and I know Indigenous people will be watching this. She's from Lockhart River and she died at the Cairns Lion Street Intoxication Shelter in December of 2023. Almost all the staff at the shelter were Indigenous. There have been concerns raised in the media of substantive care being provided and a failure to realise that gross intoxication marks serious medical conditions. I can't actually comment on that case because I have no knowledge of it, but it's salient that the issues and concerns are the same ones which prompted the creation of the Royal Commission all those years ago. I also must make a personal observation here. I have taken literally hundreds of people to the Lion Street shelter. I have nothing but admiration and respect for every single worker that I ever met. Now, that is not to say that there wasn't some sort of failure, and it's not for me to comment on that. But for what it's worth, the people that I met there have my eternal respect and gratitude. I also interviewed the former manager.
But Lion Street Diversion Centre, we're an intoxicated shelter. We're a diversion away from police custody. We always want us working very closely with the police. Let the police catch the bad guys and let us look after people with addictions and homelessness and a lot of other barriers that we have when we're engaging with clients that are using our service. I think the relationship we have now with the police, it's the best it's ever been. I've been here since 2006, and I can hand on my heart say that the police don't want another death in custody, just like I don't want another death in custody.
It's a magnificent interview. He's a great man. I'm still in contact with him, and he too has my respect and affection. But whatever the issue is, it isn't racism. And therefore, a separate system is not just unnecessary because it divides our country along racial lines. It is a counterproductive measure. It's counterproductive not just in terms of outcomes, but perhaps more importantly to the idea that we should live in a colourblind society. This is not the only inquiry. In 2005, there was a coroner's inquiry into the tragic death of Benjamin Ware, who died in the same shelter in comparable circumstances to Miss Pascoe. In an act of supreme irony, the coroner observed Indigenous people would probably be safer with the police. Page 18 of the report. The standard of care provided by the Queensland Police Service to intoxicated persons in custody, as reflected in its operational procedures manual, exceeded the standard of care provided by the Aboriginal and Islander Alcohol Relief Service, as reflected in its documented procedures. For complete clarity, I am not advocating a return to police being responsible for the custody of drunks. When there are deaths, which there inevitably are and will be due to the nature of the issue, not having the coppers taking the blame and being subject to yet more baseless allegations of racism is a good thing. Trust in a police service is very, very, very important, especially, as in the Queensland Police Service, if it's earned and due. But we as a nation do not have the capacity to ask real questions or accept truthful answers, especially, but not only, in the area of Indigenous people and justice administration. There is another clear demonstration that nothing has changed. We still can't handle the truth. Dr. Stefan Shepard et al.'s study, Closing the Incarceration Gap, says on page 9, a meaningful relationship between experiences of racism and justice involvement in Australia has not been established. Now, Dr. Stefan Shepard was subject to very nasty personal attacks, including this comment from Dr. Amanda Porter, fellow in Indigenous programs in the University of Melbourne's Law School. She said, "Can we please talk about academic integrity, rigour and racism?" she wrote. Dr. Shepard said the attacks by Porter and others and subsequent coverage in the media made him feel like his entire reputation had been tarnished, and he seriously thought about quitting. Not only is this a clear example that people just can't handle the truth, the real irony about this is that his detractors were talking about academic rigour. Now, his accusers didn't perform the simple Google search, and viewing his photo would have revealed how laughably wrong his accusers were. But the problem of academics being punished for reporting truths which do not value narratives is not just an Australian one. Academics everywhere are being punished for telling the truth. Many, but unfortunately not everyone, will have heard of Dr. Roland Fryer's paper. Roland Fryer is an American economist and tenured professor at Harvard University. He received a PhD in economics from Pennsylvania State Uni in 2002, completed his postdoctoral work at the University of Chicago with Gary Becker. He joined the faculty at Harvard University and rapidly rose through academic ranks, becoming, at the age of 30, their second youngest professor. In 2019, he published an analysis that found Black and Hispanic Americans were no more likely than white Americans to be shot by police in any given interaction. What happened to him, I hear you ask? Well, let's hear it from the horse's mouth.
I thought I was going to be able to show that the police were biased very easily. And then we gathered literally millions and millions of data points on lethal use of force. What we found was zero racial differences. And that is the part that made people really, really upset, really angry.
Lack of bias made people upset and
Yes, yeah. Yes, the world was turning upside down. Yes, there were threats against me and my family. Police are rationally responding to what they view as threats, right? When I embedded myself in the Houston Police Department, I noticed that independent of the skin color, the police officer was really scared when he pulled someone over. I asked him why. He says, man, this is Texas. We assume everyone's got a gun.
The degree of inability to people to hear the truth showed with the fact that he and his family were threatened. That's more than just cancellation. That's more than just being ignored. The media are complicit with reporting falsehoods. Here is an interview I had with Isaac Kriegman. Isaac is a writer, data scientist, economist, and lawyer. He spent 6 years at Thomson Reuters, the international media conglomerate, spearheading artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced software engineering. Now, could you tell us your story? Tell us what happened, and I'd also like you to tell us what drove you, because that's going to be a question that people ask.
Yeah. Well, basically what happened was I was fired for complaining about racialized bullying in the workplace and how it was making it impossible for us to report truthfully the news to the public.
Now, the full interview where Isaac explains what happened to him is really magnificent, even though I do say so myself, and it's one of my interviews. I'll put a hyperlink in there for everyone to watch it. And it's strange that people demanding answers are the ones that don't want to hear the truth. It's almost like they're more concerned with validating the ideas in their head than they are with solving serious societal problems. Now, it means that for all their asserted good intentions, they willingly and openly engage in counterproductive actions. The investigation of tragic deaths of Indigenous people in what was in effect the custody of Indigenous shelter workers could, if done honestly and in serious pursuit of truth, reveal real causes and thereby result in solutions shaped by fact rather than narrative. Everybody wants things to improve for Indigenous Australians. But if we, That is the we that makes up the various peoples of Australia. Can't do that. The only thing we are proving is Colonel Nathan R. Jessup was right.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
My personal views only, not the opinion of, endorsed by, or anything to do with my employer, church, family, friends, or associates.